Let me get everything pulled up here. Setting up. What? Is it gonna? Okay.
Ted is now streaming live on Facebook.
All right. We're. I never know exactly when it starts, so everybody gets this quick glance behind the curtain of what video production is like, which, for me, as you know, is basically just a hot mess. Okay. Assuming that we're live, my name is Kyle Kramer. I am the Executive Director of the Earth and Spirit Center, and I am thrilled to be joined today by my friend and colleague, Joe Grant. Hello, Joe.
Hey, Kyle, how are you?
I am good. And before we went live, I was making fun of Joe with his fashionable white Airbud earrings, which everybody seems to wear these days. So you wear it quite well, Joe.
Thank you.
Joe Grant, for those of you who don't know him, he is a native of Scotland. So we just learned that he is 100% purebred Celt. So he speaks with authority about the Celtic imagination. He's a retreat director, he's a blogger, he's a poet, he's an author, he is a spiritual teacher. Though he can't claim this of himself, I can. He is a mystic. I think he is a living modern mystic, and an activist who with his wife Anne Walter is deeply committed to a path of social justice, wedded to contemplative spirituality, in the Christian vein, but certainly beyond the Christian vein as well. And Joe, as I know, you are, as I mentioned, you are yourself from the land of the Celtic imagination and Celtic spirituality. And I wonder if we could start there. The preview, or I should say, what we're doing here is wanting to learn a little bit about Celtic spirituality as a way to invite folks into a deeper exploration of that through a course that you'll be offering in a month and a half or so. And at the end of this 10 minutes, we'll chat about that just for a minute. But Joe, so what is the Celtic imagination? And what's special or unique about it compared to other ways of seeing the world?
Okay. Well, first of all, I will admit that I'm a recovering Celt. In other words, I grew up in a global consumer culture in a post-industrial age. I actually reclaimed my heritage while I was a missionary working with indigenous people in this country and the Amazon. And I really had visceral experiences, full body experiences of what it is to live fully immersed as a part of the natural envelope of reality. So you're not in the forest, you are the forest, you know? And as a consequence of that, I began an exploration of my own roots, my own Celtic roots. And I had previously been in Iona, which is like a kind of for us, it's like the Mecca of Celtic spirituality, where St. Columba in 563 landed and essentially founded a monastery. But the word Celtic itself is kind of a misnomer because it presumes a kind of global European culture, but the people we talk about as Celts are really Gaelic people who live mostly in the northern reaches of the British Isles, or the extremes of the British Isles, Wales and Ireland and Scotland. And they're related by culture through their language, their art, their symbol, and their spiritual expressions. We know them really because the consumer culture has kind of caricatured Celtic things. We have some hangovers from that, like
just
Halloween.
Say river dance, right?
Well, river dance is actually one of the better ones, but we have Lucky Charms, the wee folk. We have St. Paddy's Day and the Green Shamrock. We have New Year's Eve and Auld Lang Syne, and we have some of those things that have been kind of co-opted as being Celtic. But the truth is, what Celtic means essentially is that indigenous, original Brittonic culture that had a unique expression in poetry. The Celtic people, different from the Roman people, lived in small settlements and enclosures. They weren't urbane. They didn't have cities. And so when Christianity arrived in Celtic lands, it kind of wove it into a pre-existing structure of kind of spiritual worldview that saw nature as inspirited, all of it. And so what happened when Rome fell, essentially, and that kind of dualistic Christianity that came from Rome, the one that was influenced by the Greek mysteries and philosophies, and spirit and matter were separated. The Celtic people then, we kind of held on to the tenets of Christianity and infused their own kind of spiritual brew, kind of like a hybrid
Right, right. An
expression of
indigenous
Christianity.
spirituality
Yeah, exactly.
plus
And the
Christianity.
reason why it flourished is because Rome had lost its power. Rome reasserted its power a couple of centuries later, and that was suppressed over many years. But there
Mhm.
was a resurgence of that because the Celtic people lived close to the land. We
Right.
don't really realize how urbane that influence has been on us as people of so-called civilized countries. Even the word civilized comes from that idea that we have conquered and dominated and
Mm,
tamed something that needed
right.
to be tamed. And so we have these words in our language: villain, heathen, pagan, all refer to people who live on the land. The
Ah,
heath people, the heathens, the people who worked the
wow.
villa vineyards were the villains. And of course, the pagans were the people who didn't live in the cities. And they were all derogatory terms. Today we have terms like redneck or wetback to determine
Uh-huh.
people who live in the soil and who are somehow lower.
Mm,
But the Celtic people didn't have that distinction
right.
because they lived kind of enmeshed in that. So an example of Celtic imagination would come out of the poetry of Yeats or the poetry or the works of James Joyce or the many kind of musical, lyrical expressions
Mm.
of spirituality that you find in that Celtic worldview. But the green world was the world of the spirit. So one way to think about what Celtic imagination does is it takes away the boundaries between earth and spirit. So what you have is earthy spirit. That's what your
Or
center
earth
would be.
and
Earthy
spirit in the case
would be
of our nonprofit.
the example. What I mean, instead of earth and spirit, you would have earthy spirit.
Oh,
In other words,
okay.
it's the one thing, because
Mm,
the earth and spirit are one. So this idea then that Christ is the stag in the forest, Christ is the eagle, the Holy Spirit is the wild goose that flies over the Greenland, So this
yeah,
sense of really living on the land and letting
right.
the cycles of nature determine how we behave and who we are and
Well,
how we see spirit.
in about the minute and a half we have left for this 10-minute conversation, which is way too short. What is a responsible way that those of us who are not Celtic could appropriate something of that spirituality in a way that that's respectful and not just exploitative and colonial?
Well, I think
Like one
actually
practice.
one simple practice would be the practice of benevolent glancing,
Hmm.
that gentle infusion of the power. Celtic people are famous for their blessings. I mean, that's one of the things that we do. That's kind of like our daily bread is we bless everything. We're always blessing. You make a loaf, you put a cross on it, you bless it, otherwise it won't come out right. You bless the fire when you made the fire. You bless the fire when you put it out. That sense that everything is infused with blessing. But benevolent glancing is a way of looking at the world with a benevolent, silent blessing. So your prayer is open-eyed. Your prayer is engaging outward. It's not interior. It's not interiorly focused. It's not a mental construct. It's actually a physical engagement with the world so that everything becomes what we call a thin place where the dimensions evaporate and you live in a kind of unitive consciousness
Wow.
by practicing that daily. I'm going to give you just to quote a little poem that I love. It's called a Celtic Rune of Hospitality. It's an anonymous poem. It's old.
Okay.
It's translated into the English, but it gives you a sense of how you infuse your daily life with your spirituality. This is called the Rune, meaning the ancient sacred words of hospitality. It goes like this: I saw a stranger yestereen. I put food in the eating place, drink in the drinking place, music in the listening place. And in the sacred name of the triune, he blessed myself and my house, my cattle and my dear ones. And the lark said in her song, often, often, often goes Christ in strangers' guise. That
Mm.
sense of all of it is a sacred celebration. And so honoring that and recognizing that many people in this country have roots deeply rooted in that earthy culture. So when you think of earth and spirit, think of earthy spirit or spirity earth, and let it
Nice.
be the oneness that it is. And how do we live into that?
Ah,
some of the things that I want to share when we get together again. So there's some definite practices that will speak to that kind of Celtic soul.
fantastic. Well, Joe, as I've told you before, I so love your Scottish accent that I would just listen to you read the phone book. But I certainly am thrilled that you'll be sharing more of this wisdom upcoming on May 26th from 6 to 8:30 p.m. outside here at the Earth and Spirit Center under a tent, open walled, or on Zoom simulcast as part of our 4-week summer meditation series. So we'll put links to that in the show notes. And Joe, I'm so grateful for you and your Celtic witness in the world. And until we see each other in person soon, which I'm looking forward to, may you be well.
You too, Kyle. Great to see you again.
Thanks.
Thank you.